On September 23, 2019, Ing Wen Tsai's office disclosed a timeline of Tsai's PhD journey in the UK, showing that Tsai submitted her doctoral thesis in June 1983. Tsai's PhD exam was held 4 months later, in October 1983. The proof of Tsai's thesis submission date was Tsai's LSE student record. According to Tsai's office, date of entry, printed on Tsai's LSE student record was the time when the doctoral thesis was submitted. So, Tsai submitted her doctoral thesis in June 1983. Tsai's office also disclosed Ian Stevenson's "To Whom It May Concern" letter dated January 23, 1984, to evidence Tsai's thesis submission date and PhD exam date. The letter certified that Tsai submitted her doctoral thesis in June 1983 and her PhD exam was held 4 months later in mid-October 1983. On February 23, 2022, UOL disclosed an email chain on whatdotheyknow.com. One of the emails in the email chain was sent from LC at UOL, stating that Tsai submitted her doctoral thesis to the Research Degree Examination Office at UOL on June 15, 1983. On October 21, 2019, Rachel McGuire, Information and Records Manager at LSE, confirmed that Tsai's PhD exam was held on October 16, 1983. It was Sunday. It appears that Tsai has ironclad evidence to prove that she submitted her doctoral thesis for the PhD exam in June 1983, and her PhD exam was held in October 1983. What was date of entry for the PhD programs at LSE in the early 1980s? The 1983–1984 UOL regulations provided that after completing the prescribed course of study, a student would normally be required to present himself for examination within 1 calendar year. To present for examination, a PhD student must apply to LSE for an examination entry form. The form must be completed and submitted to the academic registrar at UOL. In the VV file, there was a cover letter sent by the LSE Graduate School to VV's supervisor on March 7, 1983. Along with the cover letter, VV's examination entry form was sent to the supervisor for signature. On March 18, 1983, VV's supervisor sent 2 examination entry forms back to the LSE Graduate School, and one was VV's. On March 22, 1983, the LSE Graduate School office sent VV's examination entry form to the academic department at UOL on behalf of VV. The date of entry, noted on VV's LSE student record, was March 1983, when the LSE Graduate School sent VV's examination entry form to the academic department at UOL. According to the 1983–1984 UOL regulations and in light of the VV file, date of entry was the time when a PhD candidate presented himself for PhD examination by submitting an examination entry form to UOL, not when a PhD candidate submitted a PhD thesis to UOL for the PhD exam. To earn a PhD degree in the early 1980s, entry to examination and submission of thesis were 2 totally different requirements. According to Tsai's LSE student record, Tsai's examination entry form was submitted to UOL in June 1983. Could Tsai's examination entry form and doctoral thesis be submitted to UOL in the same month, June 1983? The answer is a big fat no. The 1983–1984 UOL regulations provided that the examination entry form should be submitted 4 months before the PhD thesis could be submitted. The 1982–1983 LSE calendar had similar regulations. Examination entry forms are available from the Graduate School Office and should be returned about 3 or 4 months before the proposed date of submission. 2 FOIA requests for old examination entry form were respectively submitted to but refused by UOL and LSE. According to LSE's 2023-2024 examination entry form for MPhil, PhD examination available online, the form was designed to trigger the Viva examiner appointment process. This is very important as the examiner nomination process can take some time. LSE aims to have the examiners approved by the time the candidate submits the thesis so that it can be sent out to the examiners as soon as possible. When completing this form and planning Viva dates, departments need to ensure that examiners have at least 4 weeks, ideally 6 weeks, to read the thesis. On January 19, 1983, Ian Stevenson sent a letter to Sci, informing Sci about her approved final thesis title. The information provided in the letter confirms that in the early 1980s, the examination entry form was also submitted to trigger the examiner appointment process. The university had to appoint examiners when it received an entry form. The committee responsible for appointing examiners met only twice a term in the early 1980s. The entry form should, therefore, be submitted about 4 months before the intended thesis submission date, and the examiners would need at least 6 to 8 weeks to read the thesis before the PhD exam could be held. VV's entry form was submitted to trigger the examiner appointment process at UOL on March 22, 1983. It was 4 days after the Lent term ended on March 18, 1983. VV's examiners were appointed when the committee met during the summer term between April 25 and July 1, 1983. VV most likely submitted the doctoral thesis in July 1983 as planned on March 7, 1983, and the appointed examiners were ready to read VV's doctoral thesis by then. On October 5, 1983, UOL issued the Viva result notification letter to VV. According to the decision notice issued by the Information Commissioner on November 26, 2021, a copy of the Viva result notification letter was sent to LSE to confirm that VV had been awarded a degree. It was noted under result on VV's LSE student record. Based on the entry form submission date and the Viva result notification date, VV's PhD exam was held approximately between mid-August and mid-September 1983. VV's PhD journey exemplified the UOL examination stage in the early 1980s. The LSE Graduate School sent VV's examination entry form to UOL on VV's behalf on March 22, 1983, which triggered the examiner appointment process. The committee appointed VV's examiners during the summer term between April 25 and July 1, 1983. VV submitted the doctoral thesis as planned in July 1983, 4 months after the entry form was submitted and after the examiners were appointed and ready to read the submitted doctoral thesis. VV's Viva exam was held approximately between mid-August and mid-September 1983, and the academic registrar notified the Viva result on October 5, 1983. According to the school regulations and in light of the VV file, Sci's entry form and doctoral thesis could not be submitted to UOL in the same month, June 1983. Either Sci's examination entry form or Sci's doctoral thesis was submitted to UOL in 1983, not both. If Sci's LSE student record is authentic, Sci's examination entry form was submitted in June 1983. The earliest time for Sci to submit her doctoral thesis was October 1983. Sci's PhD exam would be held in November or December 1983, at least 6 to 8 weeks after she submitted her doctoral thesis in October 1983. Therefore, if Sci's LSE student record is authentic, Stevenson's letter dated January 23, 1984, Elsie's email dated June 29, 2015, and McGuire's confirmation on October 21, 2019, were forged or based on forged student records. Is Psy SLSE student record authentic? Psy's entry form was submitted in June 1983, shortly before the summer session ended on July 1, 1983. The committee responsible for appointing examiners did not meet during the summer vacation and could only appoint Psy's Viva examiners when the committee met during the Michaelmas term from September 29 to December 9, 1983. No examiners were appointed to orally examine Psy in mid-October 1983. It was unlikely that Psy's examination entry form was submitted in June 1983. Psy's LSE student record might not be authentic. Alternatively, if Psy's doctoral thesis was submitted in June 1983 and her PhD exam was held in October 1983, as certified by Stevenson's letter dated January 23, 1984, and confirmed by Elsie's email dated June 29, 2015, and by McGuire's email on October 21, 2019, Psy's examination entry form was submitted in February 1983. June 83, handwritten on Psy's LSE student record, was either forged or a clerical error or an inadvertent mistake. The date of entry was entered when the examination entry form was submitted to UOL in February 1983, about 4 months before Psy's intended thesis submission date. It was highly unlikely to inadvertently enter June 83 on Psy's LSE student record in February 1983, even if June 83 was Psy's intended thesis submission date. Furthermore, 4 documents subpoenaed from the National Chengchi University in Taipei show that Psy began applying for a teaching position in Taiwan shortly after she withdrew from course on November 10, 1982. The first document is an official letter dated May 23, 1983. It was sent from the National Youth Commission in Taiwan to Chengchi University, recommending Psy for a position to teach laws. The letter stated that Psy was scheduled to return to Taiwan after receiving a PhD in May 1983. 3 documents were enclosed: Psy's Overseas Students Job Application Registration Form, a copy of Psy's LLM transcript issued by Cornell University, and a related certificate. The issue date of the transcript, December 10, 1982, indicates that Psy prepared to find a teaching position in Taiwan immediately after she withdrew from her course at LSE on November 10, 1982. In the Overseas Students Job Application Registration Form, Psy wrote that she studied at LSE, Department of Law, her major was Economic Law, and it was for a PhD from October 1980 to May 1983. Psy's return date was May 1983, and she expected a long-term stay after returning to Taiwan. Psy submitted the form for assistance in finding a position to teach laws in Taiwan, and the Taiwanese government accepted the form on March 11, 1983. With the prospect of a PhD and a return date in May 1983, Psy had no reason and no intention to submit an entry form so as to submit her PhD thesis in June 1983 for a PhD exam in October 1983. The related certificate to support Psy's PhD in May 1983 was a letter written by Psy's supervisor, Michael Elliott, on February 17, 1983, in response to Psy's request for a certificate indicating that Psy was about to complete her PhD work. The letter certified that Psy would shortly submit her thesis for a PhD degree, and her examination would be held not in October but in the spring. With a PhD exam in the spring of 1983, the examination entry form had to be submitted before Psy withdrew from course on November 10, 1982, and it was highly unlikely that Tsai submitted her doctoral thesis in June 1983. Tsai's May 1983 PhD is consistent with the letter written by P.C. Kennedy at UOL Central Registry Academic Division on September 30, 1987. It certified that Tsai's PhD degree was awarded after submitting a thesis title. Tsai's May 1983 PhD degree is further evidenced by a journal article published by the National Chengchi University Law Review in June 1983. The author was Ing-Wen Tsai, who had received a PhD degree in International Economic Law from LSE. Based on those 4 documents and in view of Kennedy's letter and Tsai's journal article published in June 1983, it is more likely than not that none of the records showing, certifying, or confirming June 83 as Tsai's thesis submission date and October 83 as Tsai's PhD exam date are authentic. It is important for PhD candidates to control and estimate their Viva exam date and graduation date. The design of the examination entry form enables PhD candidates to do that because it is PhD candidates who decide when to submit the entry form to trigger the examiner appointment process. LSE repeatedly reminded PhD students to submit the entry form in time to avoid administrative difficulties. VV was reminded on January 21, 1981, when the LSE Graduate School notified VV about VV's registration with UOL as a full-time student at LSE for the MPhil degree. VV was encouraged to consult with the Graduate School office if in doubt about the date by which the form should be submitted. Before being re-registered for 1981–1982, VV was required to report the expected date of entry to examination or submission of thesis. Before being re-registered for 1982–1983, VV was required to estimate the thesis submission date and reminded that the examination entry form must be submitted about 3 or 4 months before the intended thesis submission. When Ian Stevenson notified VV the approved final thesis title, the regulations relating to entry for examination were well explained and VV was reminded to submit her examination entry form. But Tsai had no clue. In a public speech on March 17, 2011, Tsai complained about the slow procedure she had experienced in the UK. She told the audience that she quickly finished her doctoral thesis, but the examiners examined her doctoral thesis for 6 months, and then she was asked to take the Viva exam.
我都认为写得很快，但是英国人的速度很慢，就是表示说他的审你的论文就审了半年，审完了以后他又请你去口试，那个口试我也很紧张，我姐又跟着我去了。
Tsai's ignorance is consistent with her PhD journey at LSE. Based on her LSE student record and in light of VV's LSE student file, Tsai was reminded only twice, when she was registered with UOL in 1981 and when she was re-registered with LSE for 1981–1982. Tsai withdrew from course on November 10, 1982, and was not re-registered with LSE for 1982–1983. Failing to re-register for 1982–1983 in June 1982, Tsai was not required to estimate her thesis submission date and she was not reminded that the examination entry form must be submitted about 3 or 4 months before the intended thesis submission. When Tsai withdrew from course on November 10, 1982, her final thesis title was not approved. As established, the Graduate School Committee responsible for approving Tsai's final thesis title met on January 19, 1983, at 4:30 p.m. It was unlikely that Stevenson issued the notification letter on January 19, 1983, informing Tsai about her approved final thesis title. As a result, Tsai had no chance to read the well-explained regulations about the examination entry form provided in the letter. Furthermore, according to 1983–1984 UOL regulations, the approval of final thesis title was notified to UOL on the examination entry form. Without an approved final thesis title, Tsai was not permitted to submit an examination entry form to present herself for the PhD exam. Since Tsai withdrew from course on November 10, 1982, no entry was supposed to be made after then, and her LSE student record should look like this. Thesis submission was an activity at UOL. The thesis submission date was not a record supposed to be recorded in the LSE student record. It is unlikely that people who are familiar with the LSE student record would interpret date of entry as the thesis submission date. June 83 was most likely purposely handwritten in the blank box under date of entry to prove Tsai's thesis submission date by someone unfamiliar with the LSE student record after Tsai claimed her PhD degree in June 1983. Tsai's LSE student record and Stevenson's letter dated January 23, 1984, were sent to LSE for authentication on March 10, 2020. On July 23, 2020, Kevin Haynes found Tsai's LSE student record and Stevenson's letter dated January 23, 1984, on page 4 and page 70 respectively in Tsai's LSE student file stored in the LSE archives and verified both of them as authentic. When was June 83 handwritten on Tsai's LSE student file? How and when did Stevenson's letter, dated January 23, 1984, land in Tsai's LSE student file stored in the LSE archives?